Haydn Denman is an award-winning lighting cameraman with a lifelong passion for photography. Ffoton spoke to him at the 2019 Northern Eye Festival in Colwyn Bay, where a selection of his work was exhibited. Haydn.
Hi.
Nice to have the opportunity to chat to you. And we've been chasing you for a while, Ffoton.
I've not been avoiding you, honestly. I've not been avoiding you.
You are a cameraman.
That's right.
But you're also a photographer. What is it about photography that floats your boat?
I've taken photographs since I was a kid, really, and knew from an early age that my future would be lens-based, and career-wise, that led me into documentary camera work and that ilk. Yeah. But photography has always been there, and it's something that draws me back, really, and it's something... people who are not in either world think they're similar realms, but they're not similar realms at all, and I think that's what draws me back, is the opportunity to be on my own, to work on my own, to do my own thing, really.
Right. Rather than be dictated to by a director?
Yeah, I mean, I direct sometimes myself as well, so, and as the industry changes, that happens more, you know, you go out as a camera director and you know, and so, but it's very much a teamwork. TV work, and although we're very small teams, you know, and I travel the world with, you know, sometimes there are only 3 people, but it's still a teamwork. Yes. Where a lot of my photography work I've been on my own, really, and it's kind of self-reliant.
Right. Do you enjoy that process? Well, you must do, because you wouldn't do it otherwise.
Yeah. I do enjoy being on my own sometimes, really. Yeah.
So from a photographic point of view, what are the things that actually? We met recently, for example. We met in the last day of the market in Abertavy, in Cardigan. And what was special about being there on that day to photograph? And what elements did you find that intrigued you about that day?
I come from a rural background, you know. I was brought up in... We moved around as kids, as a family, but it was always... rural areas, and in Wales people always ask you where you're from, don't they? It's not where you live, it's where you're from. And I say I'm from Carmarthenshire, although I was never born there, and spent very short periods of time there in a way. So a lot of my work has been, my photography work has been around the rural landscape rather than industrial landscape or the city landscape, where I've spent most of my life living now, really. So I've always been drawn back to that, really, to photograph.
Do the changes you're seeing worry you, and that it needs to be recorded in some sort of way?
I think that's something that's dawned on me in more recent years, really, as I've looked back at work I might have taken in the 90s, or, you know, occasional, I mean, in the 80s, less or so, but I did take photographs during the 80s as well. And although, you know, you take Abertavy Market as an example, you know, that you can, going there, you know, is a step back in time almost, but it's not the same. And those photographs are not the same. And I will look back at the work I did before, you can see those changes, and you can see those people are no longer there. So
it was fascinating for me to go back, because in 1971, I won a competition at the National Eisteddfod in Carmarthen, and I'd taken a series of photographs of farmers in Llandailo Mart.
Oh, right.
And I could see the difference between the guys. There was one guy, he wore his best Sunday outfit
to go to the mart.
Fantastic. And that was different to what we saw in on that day, that last day in Abertavy, which I found a very sad day. In lots of respects, because everybody were there who spoke Welsh, more or less. And it was as if...
It was an end of an era, really.
It's end of an era.
And that era is still there, but it's quietly disappearing, really.
Let's compare then. How would you have approached that from a film cameraman point of view, rather than a still cameraman point of view?
As a cameraman, moving picture cameraman, it's very much to do with building a sequence, really. Whereas, speaking personally, you know, as about the way I approach pictures, the pictures kind of stand alone almost, and I tend to shoot a lot on, you know, wide-ish lenses, whereas as a cameraman, you're changing lenses, not necessarily physically changing lenses, but you're changing the focal length all the time.
Yes, indeed,
And the reaction and the interaction you have with people is different as well, I think, especially as a cameraman rather than being a camera director, because it's a big instrument. Instrument, and you're kind of behind that.
Yes.
So you don't necessarily have that contact with people that you do as a photographer.
Yes, okay. I'm kind of attracted to doing something, with a big lump on it.
No, don't. It's heavy.
It's heavy. But on the other, you see, you're kind of displaced from reality in a way, aren't you? Because you're continually looking through the viewfinder. You're looking, and it's a different process altogether. I mean, you photographed in Eisteddfods.
I've photographed in smaller Eisteddfods over a period of 20 or 25 years, really, periodically. So I've gone back to that recently and done a couple recently as well. Yeah.
So how has that situation changed? What changes have you noticed?
I think the most obvious one is I can no longer necessarily go and photograph during the days when the kids are there.
Right. Okay.
Whereas previously, that is, and maybe correctly so, you can't do that anymore without
permission. Yeah.
So, rather than, seeking permission, the organisers just say no. Okay. So I go in the evening and when the adults are there.
If I was putting you on the spot, what's your preference? Still photography or film cameraman?
That's a difficult one, really. Film camera work has been my life in a way. It's been my livelihood. It's what's kept a roof over my children. And I've loved every second of it. Film camera work has given me the opportunity of doing things that maybe I would have wished to do as a photographer.
Right.
But I've been there and met some incredible people.
Yes.
I wouldn't give that up.
No.
But I do love photography, and often I've been to places and thought, right, I need to come back here, and I'm now reaching the age where I need to implement that because, the years are not going to allow me time to go to all these places.
But being a film cameraman has allowed you to go to exotic places. I mean, you photographed in Patagonia, for example.
Well, I did a lot of stills in Patagonia. Yeah. I've never filmed there, actually.
You've never filmed there?
No.
I would have assumed...
Well... Yeah, I don't know. This never happened. I spent I spent about 4.5 months out there photographing back in the 90s, really.
Okay. What was the impetus for that?
Well, at the time, the Arts Council were giving travel grants, and they turned me down a couple of times first, but I persevered at it and just went there and rather naively just turned up and waited for things to happen and met some incredible people, and still have very close friends out there.
Right, okay. Would you go back there again?
I should do. I should go back there again, and I will eventually. But what's interesting is, picking up what we said before, is, those photographs are 25 years old now, and a lot of those people have passed. And it'd be interesting to go back. I've not been back there, actually, to be honest.
Right.
We've had lots of Patagonian friends visit us here and visit the extended family. They've become a part of our extended family. Yeah. But I've never been back.
Right.
So it'd be interesting to go back and see the changes there. Without having that contact. I think the change would be much more obvious and apparent to me and stark, I suppose.
Yeah. You were mentioning Arts Council grants and travelling grants. Those type of grants are not available anymore. Do you have any thoughts about that? And are the cuts limiting the scope for young people? I mean, I know your daughter's a budding photographer, but she won't have that opportunity to apply for a grant to go and photograph the stuff her dad was photographing in Patagonia.
I think it's a great shame, isn't it? It offered me opportunities as a young photographer to, and I mean that work is there now. It's there to be seen. It's So it is a great shame if those opportunities aren't there for young photographers. You know, it's difficult for young photographers to start out. I mean, social media gives you a platform to put your work out there, but
it doesn't make you any money.
No, exactly, and you need a helping hand, don't you?
Yes, I guess so. So, I mean, you must offer advice. What sort of advice do you offer your daughter?
Just take pictures. That's what I try and tell her. Just take pictures all the time. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter how bad you think it is. Just take pictures.
Does she come to you with her work and show you her work?
Yeah. And I try to be objective and be as critical as I dare, really, to be honest.
I mean, in your line of work,
I show her my work as well, you know.
Yeah.
And she's
does she critical of your work?
Oh yeah, more so.
You travel to exotic places. Do you always take a still camera with you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it's frustrating sometimes. I just don't have time. I mean, they're not necessarily exotic places. I mean, they're exotic as they might be remote. But you know, in my camera work, it's documentaries that I've spent my life doing, really, and that's why I say we've met some incredible people, really, and people with difficult stories to tell, you know.
Yes, indeed. The difference, I suppose, if you've got a camera and you're taking, and if people have difficult stories to tell, but it's that teamwork thing again, isn't it? As a film cameraman, you're a team working because I've seen people freeze. How do you deal with that as a cameraman? How do you get over that hump with them?
Most people, if they've got the story, they want to tell it, I think, really. Right, you know, okay. if we're at the stage there as a film crew, and you know, and we're following a story and following a subject matter, you know, the people, by the time they sit in front of the camera, they want to tell their stories.
Okay.
Really.
Do you think that the days of documentary photography are kind of fading away?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think there's, you know, I talk to my daughter now. She's studying photography, and I speak to young people and meet other young students, and I tell her it's a great time to be a photographer. I think. Okay. You know, it seems to be a flourish of work in Wales, for example. Right. I think at the moment, you know. It's not easy, is it? But
do you think that, I'll pose a question for you. I mean, I've had this kind of theory in my head that sometimes I think kids go off to university to study photography, and I think that's great. But do you think there would be more that if they had the vision, perhaps, and the commitment and maybe the daring to go it alone, but to have a mentor working with them, would they achieve more like that than going and doing a set university course?
Quite possibly, doesn't it? Quite possibly, but then you need the mentor. You need them to find that mentor. You need the mentor to give you the time.
Yes.
I don't know if you're suggesting that I become my daughter's mentor. She probably wouldn't want me to. All these points are valid, aren't they? But I think photography courses are valid as well.
Right, okay.
I have personal opinions about, you know, the photography course that my daughter's doing, but I don't want to talk about that.
No. I understand. Yeah. But it's kind of, I don't know how old you are, Haydn.
Old enough.
But when you retire from being a documentary filmmaker, will your stills camera open not open a new world for you, but will you expand on that world?
Yeah, I suppose that's right to say that. But I mean, I've done projects throughout my camera work career, you know, and I've tried to persevere with that. Television becomes all-consuming, really, you know, and I travel a lot, you know, and I go away for periods of time, and I'm away from family life, and you know, and then there's that guilt thing. I better spend time at home and all that, you know, and I'm not criticising that, or using it as an excuse. But I've always tried to do photography work.
Right.
And well, you know, that's not something I'm not going to give up on at any point. No. Camera work is something that probably there will come a point where I have to give it up because it's just the physicality of the work involved. You know, people think video cameras go smaller. They're actually getting bigger.
Yeah,
the lenses are getting heavier.
And you're dealing with all sorts of things, aren't you?
Yeah,
There's lights and there's sound and all that sort of paraphernalia that goes with it. And I presume, looking at your work, you shoot with natural light.
Yeah. I'm speaking to you at Colwyn Bay Northern Eye Festival, and there was somebody, one of the speakers mentioned using flash. Yes. And I remember as a young photographer, flash was something I just couldn't get my head around, really. No. It never turned out the way I wanted it to turn out, so eventually I dumped it, and I've never gone back to it, really.
Yeah, I'm of the same ilk as you. I find flash a really difficult medium. It's almost a totally different technique. I like to find natural light. And it doesn't always work, and sometimes the conditions aren't right. There's too much contrast, or there's too many shadows, or whatever's going on, and that. But you find a way around it. You work the day, But
a lot of my work as well has been, as you mentioned, Eisteddfods, and earlier on in my career, I used to shoot at small village Eisteddfods as well. There's no way I could do that with a flash, really. It was very much using pushing the film and using what was there.
So did you develop yourself then?
I did.
Okay. Was it a technique that you'd learned at college? I mean, we talked about that at all.
Well, I went to Gloucester Art College.
Right.
It was a commercial course, really, and it wasn't suited to my kind of photography, to be quite honest. There was very much an advertising-based thing, and after college I went up to London and worked as an advertising assistant for a short while.
Oh, did you?
Found out that wasn't for me, really,
What did you find difficult and odd about it?
The whole scene, really, to be honest. It was different people that I don't want to be too critical of them, but it was the whole scene that I wasn't fitting into, I suppose.
Right. So while you were in London then, you're working as an assistant, Dog's Body, making the tea.
So basically, Dog's Body,
But what did you learn? What did you take away from that from a stills point of view?
I think, I'd kind of started establishing my own kind of Style, that's the word. I started establishing some sort of style in college, I suppose. That kind of documentary, black and white thing, and that's not what advertising was all about, really. So it was and I did some film, 16mm film work in college as well, which was kind of outside the realm of what the college was doing, but I kind of latched onto that, and slideshows, so a bank of slide projectors and making a movie film from stills. So I used to do that in college as well. So that's where my kind of television and film interest developed from that direction.
I tell you, there's a famous La Jetée, it's called, and it was done by a guy called Chris Markham in 1969, and he shot a film which is about a dystopian world, but he shot it all in a little Pentax, and he put it all together as a film, and there's only one, I think, one shot where there's any movement, and it's a girl blinking her eyes. But it kind of sort of blows you away. It's really worth a watch, and it's got this sort of voiceover background, and I've really thought about that would be an interesting way to go, to make movies but just using stills. But you did it in college.
I went out with trawler fishermen from Milford Haven.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and went out for about 4 or 5 trips with them. Right. It was only a small little boat.
Yes.
But they'd stay out for about 4 or 5 days at a time.
Yeah.
And they didn't have any beds there, really. People, we used to sleep in these kind of underground, underneath,
with the smell of diesel.
Diesel and fish and whatever. Yeah. And so that's the film I made, and we're using stills, really, and I think I had 8 projectors,
Good gracious me! Have you still got that work?
Do you know what? I've still got all the images. I've still got a video copy of it on Betamax or something, so it's probably impossible to see by now.
But it's an interesting way of working, and maybe, you know, because it allows scope for the imagination, doesn't it? You know, and you can sort of put stuff together which makes kind of, it's got a beginning, middle and end, and that's all one is looking for. That's all one is looking for in a photographic project, if you like, is a beginning, middle and end. So some sort of a narrative running through it, a strong narrative. So would you like to publish any of your work, I mean, book-wise?
Well, some of my work's been published recently, and I did a project in collaboration with a colleague. She's a writer on Welsh mods. That's been published as a kickstarting project, really.
Oh, right, okay.
And so it was nice to see that in book form.
Yes, and of course you have the exhibition here at the Eye.
Yeah.
How was working with the mods?
Oh, it was great. They're real characters, you know, and they love to dress up. You know, and they love to show off, really. So,
and the bling on the bikes. And
the bling on the bike. There's the mods are very much into subgroups as well. You know, so the bling on the bikes doesn't necessarily sit comfortably with all mods. They're scooterists to some people, and so there's subcultures within the subculture.
Right. Okay. So how did that develop, and how did you get into? What sort of attracted you to look at the mods and to photograph them? What was did you know any of them beforehand?
It was instigated by a colleague and a friend, and we'd kind of worked on a pilot, a film pilot together, and she's a mod, and she's a writer, so we worked on this film pilot to try and do a film on the mod subculture. That never came off, and so she approached me really to say, well, why don't we do a book? It wasn't necessarily developed initially as a photographic book, but it became a photographic book.
And still working in black and white?
It's a mixture of
it. I've not seen the exhibition
yet. It's a mixture of black and white and colour in there.
Okay. Which do you prefer?
Most of my work has always been black and white because I used to develop it myself and print it myself in wherever I could build a darkroom, and that's the way it stayed really. So
what is it about black and white? What is it? Why does it?
I think there's an element of making life easy there for me. Maybe I think. I mean, I love black and white, and there's atmosphere in the picture, and you know, and you can create a mood. But to be perfectly honest about it, it's easier as well, isn't it? I think to take a picture, make a good picture in black and white than it is in colour sometimes. And you know, I'm not making shortcuts for myself there, but I think that. Yeah,
you're right. Though. But I prefer making or taking photographs. Especially portraits. I don't know why the brain likes it so much. I don't understand the sort of chemistry in my head of why I like black and white photographs. I was working on one the other day. I did a picture of a guy at the Royal Welsh Show, and I love going to the Royal Welsh Show. I go every year. I get a commission to do stuff there for Golwg magazine, as it happens. And I enjoy the day, and it's wonderful. And there was a guy there, and he was a horse. He was Irish, and he was a horse salesman. And I've been playing around because the actual colour picture brings out his ruddiness. You know, and there's but black and white allows something for the imagination as well, don't you think?
Yeah, and the viewers sometimes, I don't think you hear many people saying, I prefer colour. But people will voice that opinion about black and white for whatever reason. People will say, I prefer black and white.
Yeah, strange one, isn't it? Yeah. I've dabbled a little in working and shooting on sets, and it's one of the most difficult things I found because you either get in the way or you have to be very aware of where things are. There's no award for being a set photographer. Have you had photographers shadow you as a documentary filmmaker?
It depends on the shoot, to be honest. A lot of my work is overseas as a cameraman. Yeah. And I get asked to do photographs for the production at no extra fee, but also it's something that's chucked in at the end of the day. Can you, or so although the stipulations sometimes for photographic work by some broadcasters are pretty thorough and strict. It's very much regarded as
something that happens at the end of the day.
And can be turned around very easily. And well, as we all know, it's not something that you can always turn around easily and get the result that you want.
I know. I worked on a few years back. There was a film, and I was hired to do the job, and the actor was being really difficult, shall we say. We'd only turned up 5 minutes before actual camera started rolling, so I had to get what I could within literally a 3-minute section. I had no more time. And that really puts pressure on stills photographers, and still photography becomes really hard.
When those people have got something else on their mind
there's
anyway.
A knock-on effect.
Whoever the subject that you're taking is potentially not there with you, but thinking of what's happening next.
Exactly. So,
I mean, I don't work in the field of dramas and
but having somebody, I mean, it would be interesting though, wouldn't it, to have a stills cameraman working on maybe if you were doing a documentary and shoot, and a stills cameraman was working as well, and it might put a different spin on things. I don't know. Do you think so, or not? I mean, is that a silly question?
No, not at all. I mean, I've visited these places as a cameraman, as I mentioned, and see places and experience events that deserve to be documented, really, in stills photography. There are financial constraints on television like everything else. What I might have had 3 weeks to shoot, I now get days to shoot. So
do you find that frustrating?
Oh, incredibly frustrating, yes. Incredibly frustrating.
Because does that mean cutting corners?
Cutting corners. It obviously means cutting corners. It means less staff available to do things, so that means I'm doing more. It does mean cutting corners, but you have to, that's a difficult term. You say cutting corners and people think immediately of health and safety corners being cut, and that's very much the top of the list these days, isn't it? And rightly so.
Yeah. It was. I worked on. Michael Sheen was on Bobble Cum, and I was asked to go in and do. And I was actually told 2 minutes before I walked onto the set that there was actually going to be Michael Sheen. So I arrived and there's Michael Sheen there, and so. And I thought, how am I going to handle this? I had a silent camera and things. But the only way I could do it, because I felt it wasn't fair on him to shoot him while he was actually doing takes. It was always doing rehearsals.
And
it was always sort of, and if it was a silent moment, ask him to turn the camera. But it's a difficult situation for a stills photographer.
I suspect if the kind of programs that I've worked on, if there was a photographer shadowing us, I mean, they would probably find it frustrating as well, to be honest, because what's happening is a television event in a way.
It is, yeah.
And even if I'm covering something else, I mean, the photographer would have to work independently of me, really, and be somewhere else.
And not get in your way.
Well, and vice versa, isn't it?
Great, thank you very much.
Diolch yn fawr. Diolch.